Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I am Ian DeMars, and always alongside me is Ryan Solomon. And Ryan Solomon, we're at a weird point now in sports. There's only one major sport going on right now, and that's baseball. There's the World Cup in soccer, but the NBA Finals just got finished, Stanley Cup just got finished. So that means we're just getting closer and closer to the new NFL season.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit boring out there in the sports world right now. And you can tell it's boring because people in the NFL world are starting to just talk about their expectations for the coming year because there isn't really enough news to go over. And that's kind of where we're at too, not going to lie. But we're more entertaining than those people on ESPN, right, Ian?
Absolutely, Ryan. You're spot on right there. There wasn't too much that happened this past week in the NFL. Mandatory mini camps started and finished, as they're only typically about 2 to 3 days. So there were some news topics to go on. We'll start off going off of last week's question of the week that was on Facebook and Twitter regarding kind of looking at the effects of what could happen based off of the Carson Wentz extension. So based off of the 2016 QB class, we had asked which of the other two main quarterbacks in that draft class would be the next to get a deal and possibly perhaps pass the deal of Carson Wentz. We had picks between Jared Goff and Dak Prescott. We had both seemed like Dak Prescott was going to be the next guy. However, Facebook and Twitter had a different view of it. 67% on Facebook and 70% on Twitter say that Jared Goff's going to be the next one in line. Are you a little bit surprised that the viewers sided with Goff instead of Dak Prescott?
A little bit, just because of the circumstances of the team. And one of our major arguments last week is that I think the perception is that Dak Prescott is more important to his team than Jared Goff is. Jared Goff is in a system right now where the team around him is extremely good. And so it's hard to tell with quarterbacks in that situation whether they're actually blossoming and becoming a superstar, a potential superstar, or if they're kind of getting carried on the backs of the rest of their teammates. And I think the view on Dak Prescott, for one reason or another, is that he's a little bit more autonomous in his team's success, even though I don't really think that's the case. I think that we've seen that Dak Prescott is good when he has really good players around him. So when they brought in Amari Cooper, when Ezekiel Elliott was doing well, when the offensive line was very good, then that team is much better. When that team doesn't have some of those key pieces, all of a sudden Dak Prescott looks like more of a mediocre quarterback. So I've always thought that the perception, though, has been that Dak Prescott's been a better player than Jared Goff up until this point. But you could make an argument that if the Rams are continuously contending for Super Bowl titles, that you'd want to lock up the guy that's at the helm of that quarterback position in a league where quarterback is a premium. So I think that could be one of the trains of thought to go Goff over Prescott. But I still maintain that the eagerness of Jerry Jones to lock up a guy that he perceives to be the future of the franchise is going to outweigh the Rams' desire to get a deal done with a guy that could potentially be replaceable by an even better player.
And you look at Jared Goff, if you compare the last couple of seasons for both him and Prescott, you can make a case that Goff has either been more consistent or maybe even slightly better. He's improved very well with the offense now that Sean McVay is the head coach. Dak Prescott, he's kind of had some inconsistent numbers. There are points where he starts off the year great and then he tumbles later on in the year. And then last year he struggled at the beginning, but then got things going later on in the year once they acquired Amari Cooper. So if we're going off of consistency, yeah, it would make sense to go Jared Goff in this case. But I do also agree that I think Dak Prescott might be the better of the two. I mean, you even look at them in college. I mean, Dak Prescott at one point was one of the favorites to be the Heisman Trophy winner his last year at college with his dual threat ability. And you look at Jared Goff, he played in the Pac-12. His team wasn't necessarily that good, and that's why his numbers didn't really shine out that well. But both these guys are going to get paid, I believe, and I both think that they're going to both end up passing Carson Wentz. It's really just a matter of when that's going to happen. We really didn't discuss this too much, but there have been reports that extension talks are already in place for Dak Prescott. I haven't heard nothing about Jared Goff and possible extension talks for him. Do you think that either one ends up actually getting a deal done this summer?
It's always possible, but I think it's unlikely. I think that those teams are going to want to wait at least one more season. But we kind of mentioned this with Carson Wentz. The person that's out there sort of looming is Patrick Mahomes. And so the longer you wait to get these deals done, the more you might end up having to pay because the way that it works is each new contract overlaps the previous one. So when you see Carson Wentz got a lot of money without winning a Super Bowl yet, where he was actually starting, without making a lot of playoff appearances or anything like that, then you kind of look at it and say, well, this person deserves that much money as well. And so when Patrick Mahomes gets a deal, he's obviously going to get an enormous deal. And so they might want to do this before that happens so that they can avoid paying even higher of a price for either of those two players.
Yeah, and that Patrick Mahomes deal is going to be a very hefty price tag for the Chiefs, assuming that he's able to keep up his numbers based off of last year. The thing that could be the difference, though, between whether if someone gets done this summer is I believe Dak Prescott's contract years in his contract is a little bit different than Goff because he was a later round pick.
That is accurate, yes.
So that could end up being a factor into whether or not an extension gets done, or he ends up maybe signing as a free agent if they're able to even retain him.
Yeah, so there's that fifth-year option where the first-round players end up with that ability to basically have a fifth year added onto their initial contract, which Jared Goff would get, but then Dak Prescott would not because he was drafted later in the round. So that is something to keep in mind and also kind of makes it lean toward Dak Prescott getting that contract first.
Very true. Again, we do want to thank all the viewers on Facebook and Twitter for participating in this past week's question of the week. Do keep an eye out for our upcoming question of the week. It should be posted either on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. There were some other new things that did happen in the NFL this week. Let's talk about Josh McCown first. So Josh McCown officially retiring from the NFL after 17 seasons. He was a workhorse in the NFL. Made somewhat of a backup quarterback at the beginning of his career, but did start quite a bit. He had played with the Cardinals, the Bears, the Browns, the Jets most recently. He also played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What's one thing that stood out to you about McCown's career?
Josh McCown was a guy that was always a backup for the most part, but you never really heard him complaining about it. He was just a constant professional athlete. And he did have his moments to shine. I remember when he got in with the Chicago Bears, he started basically just lobbing balls up to Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey and made those players a lot better in terms of their fantasy value. So he did have some moments in his career where he was a very good player. He just could never put it together for a long enough period of time with the right fit, with the right team to really be a perennial starting quarterback in the NFL. But I think people will probably remember him as a guy that was a very dependable backup and a guy that you would want to have on your team because he never made a big negative deal out of anything from what we saw, at least from the outside of the locker room perspective.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely a good team leader. Definitely was someone that was willing to play, especially through pain. This guy got banged up, took a lot of vicious hits, and continued to play even with the severe pain that he had. I do remember the year after he kind of went off as a fill-in for the Chicago Bears, where he ended up getting a good deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Unfortunately, there was a lot of hype that year for the Bucs, and he unfortunately just wasn't able to fill that hype for that team. But he was a capable quarterback, a very good backup, and when you put him in games, he didn't necessarily keep you out of games. He was someone that would risk it all in a game. And that's something that you do have to like about McCown. A 17-year career for him, a very long career. I mean, quarterbacks can typically play into their early or late 30s, early 40s in the NFL. So for him to get to that plateau is definitely a good for him. Definitely, he will be missed. I definitely did enjoy watching him play on Sundays. And it's going to be a little bit different not seeing McCown. There are reports that he will be an analyst for ESPN going forward. So if you are a fan of Josh McCown, and just check out ESPN, you should be able to see him.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he is as an analyst because we didn't really get a lot of sound bites from him as a player.
Yeah, that's very true. I've seen him appear on Get Up on ESPN before, and he actually was pretty entertaining. If you're a fan of Dan Orlovsky on Get Up, I think you'd be a fan of Josh McCown. I kind of say they're somewhat similar.
Dan Orlovsky's not bad, so I'm sure he'll be fine, basically. But probably better than Jason Witten.
Yeah, that could be the case, and that's probably the case why Jason Witten came back to the NFL.
That is true. That was part of the speculation.
And there was an interesting, weird case that happened in the NFL. So the Detroit Lions, they were in position to trade one of their tight ends, Michael Roberts. He was expected to be traded to the New England Patriots, which would have been a big plus for them, especially with Rob Gronkowski returning. However, Roberts failed his physical. As a result, the trade was rescinded. He stayed with the Detroit Lions. What happened later? The Detroit Lions waived him, and he has since been picked up on waivers. And who claimed him? The Green Bay Packers, which is an interesting claim on waivers because of the fact that they have Jimmy Graham and they still have Mercedes Lewis as well, and they drafted Jay Sternberger out of Texas A&M this year. So obviously this is kind of a bizarre scenario, but let's first look at his new team right now. Are you a little bit surprised that the Packers picked him up?
A little bit, because the Packers are a team that didn't seem to have an immediate need at the tight end position. But, they're looking for a long-term solution that can fill multiple roles there. Jimmy Graham didn't really blossom in the offense like they hoped they would last year. And Mercedes Lewis, obviously, very old, near the end of his career. So you have competition potentially at that position for the future going forward. So it's a little surprising, but not totally shocking, especially since the Packers have always kept multiple tight ends on their roster.
Yeah, and you look at Roberts, he had a pretty decent year for the Detroit Lions, actually. He had a couple of good games where he went off for them, and obviously the Patriots saw that, and that's why they did originally try trading for him before the trade was rescinded. Do you think that this maybe puts a guy like Mercedes Lewis on the cut line once training camp starts?
I mean, it's possible, but you just have to see how it all plays out. There's no way to tell which players are going to get cut, and clearly nobody is immune to it other than the absolute stars, which Mercedes Lewis is not.
Yeah, obviously Mercedes Lewis isn't a big-time tight end. He wasn't necessarily a huge tight end when he was at least his days with Jacksonville, but was a very good, capable tight end, had his moments, and now it's kind of more of one of the veteran leaders, you could say, on the Green Bay Packers. How big of a miss would you say it is for the Patriots to not be able to get this guy?
It's definitely a bit of a miss because they need help at the tight end position. So we were kind of wondering what they were going to be able to do with that spot. And this would have at least sort of stopgapped it for them for the time being. So it's big for them to not be able to get that player to fill that role. But there's other players out there during the preseason, during training camps that they can take a look at, that they can bring in. So it's not a huge miss, but it definitely hurts them a little bit.
Yeah, and you look at the Patriots right now. They did get Benjamin Watson this offseason free agency. However, he is going to be suspended for the first 4 games of the season. So you're kind of going to be relying on some of those younger tight ends on the roster. So I think that was the main reason why they did try going after Roberts, was to use him as their number one, I think, going into the season. It's a little bit of a miss for them, but as you said, once training camp starts, we'll start seeing some of these guys who haven't really signed yet maybe get an opportunity. And who knows, New England could be that place where someone goes.
I mean, New England is that team also that is going to find a way to work around whatever their roster weak spots are. And I wouldn't even be surprised if they went to more of like heavy receiver sets or more, moving a potential fullback or running back to sort of a tight end or slot receiver sort of position to make up for the fact that they don't have a whole lot of talent there. Like, they'll find a way around it even if they don't have a technical tight end on their roster. I mean, you look at even like a team like the Packers that needed help at running back, they transitioned Ty Montgomery to a running back. There's no reason to think that the Patriots couldn't find some sort of ingenious or inventive way to do sort of a similar thing with their roster.
Very true. Another interesting story that happened this past week that we didn't really discuss too much, but I thought we should mention it. So, Chicago Bears, obviously, we saw that they had some kicking issues last year. We saw that they ended up letting go one of the three kickers that they signed this offseason, and Chris Blewett. We also saw an interesting story that happened where basically Coach Mike Nagy put their other two kickers currently on the roster, Elliot Fry and Eddie Pinheiro, in a bit of a tough situation, basically saying they both missed a kick in the last day of minicamp that the team would have to run gassers for their second half of their last practice. And luckily for the Bears, both their kickers made their kicks. So obviously now that Chris Blewett's out of the competition, do you think that one of those two guys, Fry or Pinheiro, will end up being the kicker next year?
Hard to say because kickers come and go like revolving doors. So I don't know a whole lot about either of those kickers. I don't know their resume or anything, so it's hard for me to pick one. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is a couple other names during official training camps that come in and possibly take that spot because you want somebody that you can depend on who's reliable. So there's kind of a constant pool of kickers in the NFL where the kickers go into free agency and then they end up on another team. And that's sort of the way that it goes. So it depends if the Bears want to try to bring in a new kicker that they're going to have as a dependable franchise guy for like 15 years, or if they want to go with a veteran that they think they can rely on. Here's an interesting thought is that with how important kickers are becoming, and we've seen it the past couple of seasons, maybe teams are going to start drafting kickers a little bit higher or trying even harder to find a kicker that they can rely on in their scouting reports. And maybe how we have sort of franchise quarterbacks, you're going to see more teams searching for a franchise kicker that they can rely on for 10 to 15 years.
I think that's definitely going to be a true case. There is always that risk, though, of taking a kicker, especially a little bit higher in the draft. Remember Roberto Aguayo a few years ago with Tampa. They spent a very high draft pick on him, and he's not even in the league anymore. So it's always a risk of drafting a kicker, but that could maybe be a trend going forward where we see more between 5th to 7th round draft picks used on kickers with teams in tough situations. Now, looking at this field of kickers right now, Fry and Pinheiro. Pinheiro, I'm not really too familiar with. Fry, I do remember I believe he was in the Alliance of American Football when the league was going on this past year. But I do think we're going to see a veteran on the team end up being the kicker this year, whether that could possibly be a guy like Robbie Gould, who's requested a trade out of San Francisco. Maybe ends up being one of the guys on Green Bay who gets cut, whether that be possibly Sam Ficken or even Mason Crosby. I mean, Crosby's in the competition, didn't necessarily have the best year last year. So it easily would not surprise me if maybe one of those guys, assuming that one of them does get cut at the end of training camp, goes on to play in Chicago.
It's quite possible. And you see a lot of times players that get cut, especially if it were to be a Mason Crosby, will tend to go someplace that's somewhat close to where they've been living or playing. So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility if he were to get let go to go down to Chicago. Here's a weird thing about kickers that I've always wondered is you would think it would be the easiest position to scout for college because nothing changes. So you look at, NFL, every other position, you're playing against bigger, stronger guys. A kicker, what would possibly change from when you're in college to when you're in the NFL, except maybe having to take longer field goals more often? You would think that you would have a pretty good reservoir of experience to draw from to see if a player is going to be any good when they come into the NFL. It's just very strange to me.
Yeah, and you can even make a case that kicking in college is more difficult than it is in the NFL because based off of where the field lies on college, I mean, it's not the field goal, but on the field they can kick far on the side farther into the net than they can in the NFL. The hash marks, I believe, in the NFL line up directly with the field goal posts, while in college they're a little bit offset more. So it gives them a little bit more room. So you can make a case that it might be easier in college, but that could also make it a lot more difficult.
Yeah, so it's like I said, very strange. Would think it would be better. I remember Aguaye, I think, didn't miss a kick for a number of years in college, and then when he got to the NFL, he couldn't even make extra points. So I don't know what changes in that amount of time. But it could be
Yeah,
something that changes the NFL is that they might have to look harder at those guys and come up with some better ways to understand whether they're going to be successful pros or not.
yeah, it's really a question that we really don't know. It might just be something that's in the kicker's head, something that unfortunately we can't give the answer to since none of us were ever kickers in our respective days of football. But it will be interesting to see who ends up being the kicker for the Bears of this upcoming season, especially since two of the guys are on their roster right now are very unfamiliar. But that basically wraps up all the news that happened in the NFL this past week. So what we're going to do next is over the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to be starting to preview the upcoming NFL season. This week, we're going to be focusing on the AFC conference. We're going to be breaking down each division and kind of just giving our thoughts on who's going to win the division, something that could surprise people, and possibly a bold prediction coming up. So let's start off with the AFC, Ryan. Let's start with the AFC North. So last year we saw that the Pittsburgh Steelers did not end up winning that division. They obviously had the issues with Le'Veon Bell last year and then Antonio Brown at the end of the year. And we saw the Baltimore Ravens with rookie Lamar Jackson come and take that division. Baker Mayfield helped the Browns improve last year. Cincinnati, after a great start, faltered due to a bad defense and injuries at the end. So let's start off with that division. So Ryan, first let's preview it by picking a winner. Who do you think ends up winning the AFC North this year?
So just as a big preview, kind of like you said, to the AFC North, this is a division that's going to be highly anticipated because of the turnover that we've had with the Steelers roster and the Browns roster. So the Ravens are going to be sort of similar to what they were last year. We'll have to see if Lamar Jackson can play as well as he did down the stretch, or if teams are going to start to figure out how to defend him a little bit better. My pick for this division goes against the trendy pick, and it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think after clearing out the malcontented people on their roster and Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, I think the Steelers will be able to go back to focusing on playing football. I think that Juju Smith-Schuster and James Conner, Ben Roethlisberger will have a really solid season. I think they'll find a way to shore up that defense a little bit more. And I think they're going to end up winning the division with something around a 10-6 record.
All right. So I'll go with my winner first before we switch on to the next topic regarding that division. It's a really tough division to pick out because you look at if everything kind of stayed, like example, if maybe there weren't that many issues in Pittsburgh last year, maybe Cincinnati doesn't get banged up, you could really make a case that that division might have been the best division in football last year, at least in the AFC, you could say. It's kind of tough to pick because we don't really know what Cincinnati is going to look like with their new head coach and with those guys healthy. It's kind of hard to see if Lamar Jackson's going to improve, especially in the passing game based off of last year. How is Ben Roethlisberger going to play without the other killer bees in Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown? And then with Cleveland, you got a lot of new talent. Is all that talent going to work well together? And I'm going to go with kind of the trendy pick right now. I'm going to go with Cleveland. And I think it's going to be a fantastic race in that division between all four of the teams, honestly. But I think from what we saw with Baker Mayfield last year, seeing him kind of improve that team over the year, the defense looks a lot better. They obviously got some great pieces on offense now to go with Baker and Jarvis Landry and Nick Chubb getting Odell Beckham this year, Kareem Hunt once he sits out his suspension. And then that defense, they picked up Olivier Vernon, so they're definitely looking good as well. I think that they're going to be the one that wins the division this year.
I know you've been on the Browns bandwagon ever since the end of the season, essentially. And so I actually went in a totally different direction with my surprise for the division. And my bold, extremely bold pick is that the Browns actually end up with a worse record than they finished last season with. So I think that roster build is going to take time to actually fit into place. And you can already see a little bit of infighting with Baker Mayfield calling out Duke Johnson for wanting to be traded, where he said he just should, go out and play football, and a lot of the guys in the locker room had to address it. I think you're going to get more of that kind of stuff, especially if they lose a couple of games. And I think it's going to take a long time for that group of guys to figure out how to be with each other and how to have each other's backs and how to actually win football games. And so I think they're going to end up with a slightly worse record than they had last year. That's my bold prediction.
All right. Is that your surprise and your bold prediction then, Ryan?
It is, yeah.
Okay. So I got a different thing for surprise and a different thing for bold prediction. So I'll do surprise first. For my surprise, I actually think that from first to last in the division is going to be separated by, I'd say, 3 games, which means this is going to be a very competitive division, and literally it could come down to the last couple weeks of the season to determine who will win this division. That's how good I think this division could possibly be this season. And my bold prediction, I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to take last place in the AFC North this year. I think that Ben Roethlisberger missing Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, although he does have Juju Smith-Schuster, who played very well last year, showed that he could be a number 1 receiver. James Conner had his moments last year, but he also had those signs where you could tell that he might not be ready to be a number 1 capable back on a team. I just think that he's going to be missing those pieces, and I think that could hurt them. And as a result, they could end up taking last place in that division.
You went with your surprise and bold prediction be 2 separate things.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I kind of got where you were coming from, because yours was I was kind of surprised to hear that, and it was a bold prediction as well. So
yeah, I went with all of my divisions. I did one thing that was kind of both a surprise and a bold prediction.
Yeah, and I think I had a couple like that as well. I just think for this division, I think that it's going to be somewhat of a surprise to see how close it is, but the real bold is going to be Pittsburgh.
Fair. Which division do you want to go to next?
Let's go East. So obviously we know the king of that division since you can maybe say the last 15 plus years has been the New England Patriots. They're the defending Super Bowl champions. Obviously still have Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Josh McDaniels. Do lose Ron Gronkowski though, so it will be interesting to see how they adapt there. You look at the Dolphins, they appear to be in a rebuild mode. They did get Josh Rosen this season or this offseason in a trade. And they also did sign Ryan Fitzpatrick, so it'll be interesting to see how that lays out depending on who will be the starting quarterback. You look at the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen surprised a lot of people last year, mainly with his legs and his running ability. It'll be interesting to see how he's able to adapt and show off that big arm he has. And then obviously it'll be interesting to see how LaShawn McCoy, after having some issues last year, and Frank Gore now on the team handle the backfield duties. And then you look at the Jets, obviously they've got some really big signings. Le'Veon Bell, C.J. Mosley to go with young second-year quarterback. Sam Darnold got Adam Gase as a head coach. So, Ryan, who do you have winning this division? I think we both know, but let's still hear from you. Who do you have?
I think that it's obvious to everyone that this division is going to be ruled this year by the Buffalo Bills. No, just crickets. I'm just kidding. It's the Patriots. We all know it's going to be the Patriots. But the group of teams in this division, other than the Miami Dolphins, looks like they're starting to be on the up and up a little bit. The Bills have a young quarterback. The Jets have a young quarterback. And they're trying to get that roster to a point where it's headed in the right direction. I think both of those teams are actually doing that. I think that the Patriots are still far and away the best team in the division. Tom Brady is still playing at a high level, especially considering his age. And Bill Belichick is still masterminding that roster and trying to get the best out of all of his guys that he has. And until one or both of those guys are gone, I don't think another team is going to take over this division from the Patriots. But in this one, I can kind of I can split it up between a surprise and a bold prediction. So my surprise for this division is that it's not going to be quite as bad as people think. And each team in the division will at least have 4 wins on their ledger at the end of the year, which for the Dolphins is pretty surprising. My bold prediction is that the Jets go from worst team in the division to the second best team in the division. And I think they're going to get a record that's going to be somewhere around 8-8.
That's a very good breakdown. I am agreeing with you as well. The Patriots definitely are the top of that division and are going to be until we see one of the following: Brady retire, Belichick retire, McDaniels taking a different job. I think until one of those fall into play, they're going to be the top of that division. Even though you look at Tom Brady no longer has Rob Gronkowski. Chris Hogan signed away in free agency. They're a different team this year, but they're still going to be the team to beat. Looking at a surprise in this division, um, it's kind of tough just because I can make a case where I think New England, my surprise would be that they aren't going to be one of the top two seeds in that division. I can see them or in that conference. I think that they're going to end up playing wild card weekend against two I really don't know, but I just think that there's going to be a little bit of a setback with no Rob Gronkowski there. He was a huge factor for that team, and they have played well without him in the past. But you look at a full season trying to adapt a different tight end to that offense, I think is definitely going to be a big factor into what happens for them this year. But my bold prediction this year for the AFC East is that the Miami Dolphins will not take last place. In fact, I think that they're still going to be the second best team in that division.
Wow.
You look at the quarterbacks on that team. Ryan Fitzpatrick is still a very good, capable quarterback in the NFL, whether that being a starting or a backup quarterback. We don't really know what's going to happen regarding that cute quarterback race with him and Josh Rosen. But I think whoever starts between those two, I think that they're going to lead them to a good record. Remember, they still have Kenyon Drake, who took huge steps forward last year at running back. Their defense is still a very solid defense, and I think that Devontae Parker is going to break out this year. Now, last year, he didn't really get too much opportunity. There were reports that they were looking to trade him. Then they ended up signing him again in free agency, and he actually did very well in the offseason workout so far. So I think that the Dolphins are going to continue to be the second team in that division. Even if they are going to try to be that second team, they're still going to end up being the second best in that
I was going to say, I kind of think they don't want to be the second best team. I think they're sort of in tank, rebuild, trust the process mode. And I think that their upper management might be sort of upset if Ryan Fitzpatrick turns on the magic for half the season and they end up being the second best team in that division.
Yeah, and it's just kind of tough to break down the rest of that division because assuming Josh Rosen wins the quarterback competition, you have three second-year quarterbacks starting in that division itself with him, Josh Allen, and Sam Darnold. So we could really see a back and forth between all three of those teams at the bottom of that division.
I bet even though those games won't be highly anticipated, you'll probably end up with some really, really fascinating results and a very interesting quarterback play in that division.
Yeah, and I love how the three of them are in the same division because that way we can actually see kind of a breakdown of who might be the second best of that draft class. Because I think right now we're seeing a lot of signs that Baker actually was the best quarterback in that division. But we really could maybe see a case where maybe one of those guys outshines Baker this upcoming season.
Yeah, and you don't really know what you're going to get out of a quarterback until at least a couple of years down the road because it seems like the quarterbacks that have a lot of success their rookie season often sort of regress a bit their second year, and then the vice versa is true with a lot of quarterbacks that have a little bit more of a struggle. I mean, you look at like Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, both of those guys were terrible their first season, and then the next couple of years they improved. And then there's always those flash in the pan guys that are just great for 1 year. You look at maybe a Robert Griffin type player, even though injuries kind of derailed him. You never know what's going to happen. So it's tough to make a call or a snap judgment on a quarterback after just one season. So this is going to be a big year for growth for all three of those guys.
That's very true. Let's move on now to the AFC South. So last year we saw some unique things happen in that division. You look at Jacksonville. A lot of people thought that they could possibly be a Super Bowl team at the beginning of the year. They end up being not in the playoffs and actually the worst team in that division. Look at Tennessee. They were kind of inconsistent throughout the whole season. They had some injuries, but they really never found their core identity throughout the season. The Indianapolis Colts, Andrew Luck came back. There were some questions about if he was fully good to go at the beginning of the year, and then ended up playing great down the stretch to the point where they ended up advancing to the divisional round of the playoffs. And then the Houston Texans, they also had some issues at the beginning of the year, whether or not that they could actually do well once they get to the postseason, because a lot of people picked them to be that winner in that AFC South, but there was also questions regarding can they protect Deshaun Watson. We saw once it got to playoff time that they weren't able to do that, and they ended up losing, although they did win that division. So let's start off with the winner. So Ryan, who do you think wins the division this year?
So I'm going to give you my surprise because my division winner is a surprise. And that surprise is that Nick Foles and his leadership lift the Jaguars to the top spot in that division. So this division is going to be highly competitive because, as you mentioned, the Colts and the Texans both made the playoffs last year, and it was sort of a back and forth affair for most of the season between those two teams. The Jaguars, obviously a huge disappointment after making it to the AFC Championship game the year prior, and now they're looking for Nick Foles to really hoist that team up a little bit and get its defense back to its former glory by taking some of the pressure off of them, which I think he's going to be able to do. Because if you look at the makeup of this roster, it's very similar to the roster that the Eagles had when Nick Foles took them to the Super Bowl and ultimately won. Sure, there's a little less firepower on the offensive side of the ball in the receiving core, but there are still some solid players on the offensive side of the ball. And what's really the biggest problem right now is the attitude of the defense and the attitude of some of the players such as Leonard Fournette. So if Nick Foles can come in there and have some solid veteran leadership, tell the players that he's been there and done that before and show them what they need to do to make it to a Super Bowl and ultimately win it, I think that this team can be a lot more successful this year than they were last year.
Yeah, that is a surprise. I was not expecting you to say that. I know you've been a guy who's been high in the Indianapolis Colts, so I was very surprised to hear that.
I still like the Colts sneaking in as a wild card team. I think it's going to be very competitive the whole year. But before you give your picks, my bold prediction is going to be that two quarterbacks that start the season in this division as a starter don't finish as a starter due to injuries or otherwise.
All right. Do you have any guesses on which quarterbacks those will be?
I do. The two quarterbacks that are the most apt to run in this division, which is Deshaun Watson and then also Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota's had some injury issues the past couple of seasons already, and Deshaun Watson looked like he was one bad hit away last year from going out. So I could see either of these guys having trouble, which sort of is going to derail their respective teams for the season.
Yeah, I think that is that's a bold prediction, but I think that could actually happen based off of their kind of style of play. I think that the Colts are going to win the division. I think we saw a lot out of Andrew Luck last year coming off of the shoulder injury that shows that he is back and he might be better than he was before. That offensive line was a huge improvement for them that kept him protected throughout the whole season. I think that was a major success to why they were able to do so well in that second half and get into the playoffs and do well as well. Marlon Mack was a little bit of a surprise too, a very good, capable back for them that worked out, especially in times where they didn't necessarily do the best passing the ball. So I think that the defense even looks a lot better too. So look for them to win the division, but I do think it will be a tightly packed division this year in the AFC South. My surprise that I think could happen is that I think the Houston Texans could take last in the division this year, honestly. The reason why I say it could happen and it would be a surprise to happen is because of you look how different the team is when Deshaun Watson isn't the quarterback. Their style of play drops dramatically, whether that's the scramble ability to make something out of the pocket. I think that if it were a case where he gets injured, maybe they lose another wide receiver, which they've had issues with the last couple of seasons, or maybe it's another star defensive player. Any one of those, I think, could be a reason why the Texans end up taking last. But my bold prediction, and I'm not sure if you think this is bold, but injury or not, I don't think Marcus Mariota is going to be the starting quarterback for the Tennessee Titans by the end of the season. He's in a contract year, and he's only led them to the playoffs 1 year. And last year he took a step back. Yeah, there were some injury issues, what's not, but there is some concern. And how big of a concern? They traded for Ryan Tannehill, a guy who started in the NFL before. Not saying that he's a better quarterback than Mariota, but they both are first round draft picks, and you can make a case that Ryan Tannehill could be a starting quarterback for any team right now in the league. And I think that if Tennessee is not in playoff contention with a few weeks left, that they might end up giving the season to Ryan Tannehill just to kind of see what he's looking at and possibly evaluate their quarterback look for 2020.
So clearly, somehow, we were both on the same page with that aspect of believing that Marcus Mariota, for whatever reason, would not finish the year out as a starting quarterback. And I don't know if it's super bold. It's definitely at least a little bold, slightly unexpected. But he just hasn't blossomed in the way that they were hoping that their starting quarterback would blossom, especially a guy taken as high in the draft as he was. When you look at some of these other quarterbacks doing so well in the NFL, that, are kind of more on the younger side, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott occasionally, guys like that. And you think Marcus Mariota, who is such a high draft choice, you would expect him to be farther along than he is right now. And the year they did get into the playoffs under him, it seemed kind of like a fluke. And then they had that big comeback against the Chiefs where he ended up throwing a touchdown pass to himself. It just didn't feel like it was necessarily a win that they deserved to even get. So I can kind of see where the coaching staff, the fans, the management would kind of be saying, okay, maybe it's time we look at elsewhere than this guy under the contract here.
Yeah, and you look at the case, it might be a case where he, the number 2 quarterback in his draft class, and the number 1 quarterback in that draft class, Jameis Winston, might not be starting quarterbacks for their respective teams after this season.
Yeah, and that's just how it goes with some draft classes. I mean, you look at the Matt Leinart, Vince Young draft class, whenever that was, sometime in the 2000s. Those guys were expected to be huge playmakers and lead teams to the playoffs and Super Bowls, and both of them ended up out of the league relatively quickly. So you never know what you're going to get in these draft classes.
All right, let's move on to the final division in the AFC, and that's the AFC West. There's a lot of hype in this division based off of last year. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes took over that division, leading the Kansas City Chiefs to the playoffs last year. And they were merely about 2 minutes away last year from getting to the Super Bowl. So he had a huge year. There was obviously the issues with Kareem Hunt that ended up being a factor for them later on in the year. There's currently the issues with Tyreek Hill, which we still don't know what the results are going to be with that. They still have Travis Kelce as well. So the offense is stacked. The defense could have some issues. We're not really sure. The Los Angeles Chargers, they took a big step forward last year. Philip Rivers had one of his best seasons in the NFL last year. The defense got going once Joey Bosa came back healthy. But when they got to the playoffs, that second half against the Ravens and the whole game against the New England Patriots, that defense kind of fell apart a little bit. Looking at the other 2 teams, the Denver Broncos, they had a down year last year after signing Case Keenum to a big deal. He's no longer a part of that team. Philip Lindsay was a huge surprise for them last year, an undrafted rookie who ended up being the starting running back for that team. The defense also took a little bit of a step back. And then the Raiders, John Gruden became the coach. There was a lot of hype there, but the play disappointed. Offense wasn't the best. Defense wasn't the best. And as a result, they ended up being the worst team in that division. So let's start it off, Ryan. Who do you have winning the division this year?
Yeah, this division is suddenly pretty interesting when you look at how many draft picks the Raiders were able to acquire, suddenly bringing in a lot of new players that they hope are going to be talented. Suddenly, the Denver Broncos are the only team with a Super Bowl winning quarterback at the starting spot. I'm going to go with my surprise first again. My surprise is going to be that the issues with Tyreek Hill impact the Chiefs way more than we would expect. And I'm going to say that it impacts them so much that the Chargers end up winning this division. Now, not totally out of the realm of possibility, the average fan should know, because the Chargers were very close to winning it last year already. I think they were only 1 game away from Kansas City in the standings and even defeated the Chiefs down the stretch, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're about right on that one.
Yeah, so I see the Chargers taking another big leap forward, trying to get Philip Rivers to a Super Bowl. And I think they're actually going to win this division over the Chiefs. And I think that Mahomes is going to have a little bit of a sophomore slump. And so my bold prediction is that Phillip Rivers this year throws for more touchdown passes than Patrick Mahomes.
Okay. Um, it's funny that you say sophomore slump for Mahomes because he's technically in his third year, but basically you could wipe out his rookie year because he only really played one game if you look at the statistics playing that regular season finale game. But I do think that we're going to see a little bit of a step back from Mahomes. I still think that he's going to play well enough that they're going to win the division. I not really. It's not looking like Tyreek Hill is going to face any suspension at this point regarding the case. Looks like the case has kind of depleted itself a little bit. We haven't really heard too much about it recently. The NFL is still looking into it, but it seems like that he's not going to face any sort of major issues, at least from what we see currently. I still think the Chiefs are the top of that division. I think that they got a little bit better defensively this offseason. And yeah, it will be a matter of how the offense looks. Look at they did extend Damian Williams this year or this offseason. So he's going to be the main back. Spencer Ware, I believe, or I believe he's still on that team. I can't remember if he signed elsewhere, but either way, the backfield still will be good. And even if Tyreek Hill does miss some time, they still have guys like Travis Kelce, still have Sammy Watkins. I think that, and they did draft a guy out of Georgia, Hardman, I believe it was. So I think that they still will be able to do something on offense, and I think that they will win the division. My surprise in this division is that the Raiders, where they moved to Vegas next year, I think that they finished with a record of at least 500. I think trading for Antonio Brown, they drafted a lot of players that played in the national championship this offseason. They wanted to build a winning pedigree. And Antonio Brown does have some issues. Yes, I do understand that. John Gruden has won a Super Bowl, though. He has made it to Super Bowls. You look at Derek Carr. He had a setback last year. I still think he's a very good quarterback. He's still a young quarterback as well. There's some issues on how is their rookie Josh Jacobs going to do in the backfield. And obviously there's a lot of other younger talents on that team, as I mentioned. But I think that they're going to do a lot better than people are thinking, and I think they finished with a 500 record. So that's my surprise. My bold prediction, though, for this upcoming season, I think that Melvin Gordon cements himself as he's already a top 10 back in the league, but I think this year he's going to take that next step. And I think he's going to get into that top 5, top 3 running back range. And I think that he's going to be in line to possibly win MVP this year.
Wow, that is bold. Melvin Gordon winning MVP. He's been huge for fantasy football. Even when he was just getting into the league as a rookie, he was a touchdown machine. Got a lot of those games with 3 one-yard rushing touchdowns, did Melvin Gordon.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he's going to win it, but he's definitely going to be up there. And we saw how important he was to that team last year, especially when he missed a little bit of time due to injury. He's been improving every year. And I think that once if he can stay healthy for a full season, the Chargers are going to be in the playoff picture next year no matter what, whether that's winning the division or the wild card. But he's going to be the huge factor for them. Phillip Rivers is still going to do Phillip Rivers things, but Melvin Gordon's going to take that next step this year.
The AFC is interesting. There's a lot of teams that seem like they could potentially be on the rise with young rosters and players ready to make big improvements. So you can look at almost any of these divisions, and there's at least a couple teams that were near the bottom last year that we're thinking are going to at least be better, if not rising up and starting to take a little bit more command in those divisions.
Yeah, and with that does conclude our breakdown of the AFC for our offseason preview. Make sure to tune in next week. We'll be breaking down the other side, the NFC, and then once we get both those cleared up, we'll make more predictions regarding maybe some the full playoff picture, early Super Bowl predictions, and then obviously we'll do a little bit more of that right before the season starts. But going on to our next subject, we are getting towards the end of the show, and that leads us to one of our favorite subjects, and that's talking about fantasy football. If you've paid attention over the last few weeks, we've been starting our top five rankings. We've done quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and flex picks last week. And this week, we're going to a spot where you really don't draft this position until the end. And that's the defense, which can play a huge factor for your team, especially since they give you 10 points right away when a game starts. So, Ryan, obviously, defense is a key part to football, or mainly especially in fantasy. So, what do you have for your top five for defenses?
Yeah, so defenses are interesting because I usually don't even take one until the second to last pick of the draft, and then I usually stream it throughout the year. So I usually look for matchups more so than I look for actual talent on a defense. And we saw with the Jaguars last year that a team that you expect to be incredibly good and useful defensively can just flounder for absolutely no reason during a season. But that being said, I tried to pick the 5 best defenses to get you fantasy points. So at number 5, I have a team that's going to be useful simply because they should get a lot of turnovers while teams are trying to press to score enough points to beat their offense, and that's the New Orleans Saints. So the Saints are going to put up numbers, and a lot of other teams that don't have quite as good of an offensive output capability are going to have to try to keep up, which means that there's going to be a lot of throws probably thrown into places they shouldn't be, and a lot of running backs trying to stretch for extra yards. And that means that opportunities for this defense that was actually pretty solid last year. Going to number 4, I have the San Diego, or formerly San Diego, now Los Angeles Chargers. And I think they're going to build on the season they had last year. They have a lot of good young players with Bosa on the defensive line. I think he's going to get a lot of sacks and cause general havoc in the backfield. At number 3, I have the other Los Angeles team, the Rams. I think that they're going to build on their defensive success they had last year. And this team sometimes looked very good on defense and sometimes looked like they were Civ-like, especially against the Kansas City Chiefs in that classic, incredibly high point-scoring game that they had in primetime. Number 2, I have a team that is here specifically because of the division they play in, and that's the New England Patriots. So they're going to have 6 games against teams that have questionable quarterback positions right now. So we mentioned the 3 quarterbacks that start in the AFC East under Tom Brady, and that's the 3 sophomore quarterbacks in probably Rosen, and then why am I blanking on their names?
Rosen, Darnold,
Darnold, and then Josh Allen. So there's going to be a big potential here for interceptions and games where the other team sort of just falls flat on offense. And so I think the New England Patriots defense could really take advantage of that. And then number 1, who I think we're going to have a consensus on, is going to be the team that really stood out last year defensively, and that's the Chicago Bears. It's hard to argue when you have Khalil Mack just destroying the backfield, getting sacks, getting quarterback pressures, and then you also have Kyle Fuller, and now adding Clinton Dix, who was on the Packers, and then most recently the Redskins. So this team probably got a little bit better on defense, even though they lost some pieces, and I'm looking to them to have a really solid season again.
Yeah, I think the Bears definitely are one of those teams that you do have to look out for. I do like the list that you put together. I have some teams that are in there that you have. I have some that you did not mention. I'm going to start with one you did not mention. Number 5, I'm going to go with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, last year, they took a surprise step forward on defense. Remember, they had to rely heavily on their offense for quite some time. So that's why they took a little bit of a step back last year, last couple years defensively. But they did not necessarily have to rely fully on the offense last year. The defense was a huge help for them, especially in the playoffs. And I think that they're going to continue to improve. And now I think they're at that point where you can say they could possibly be an elite defense. Number 4, I like also the New Orleans Saints that you had mentioned earlier. I think that they started off slow last year, but then later on in the year, they returned to that form of a couple years ago. And we definitely saw that in the playoffs as well against the teams like the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Rams, even though they did lose that game. Number 3, I like. I'm just drawing on. It's a little bit of a surprise here. I'm going to go with the Indianapolis Colts. They took a huge step forward last year on defense. Defense has been an issue for them. the offensive line was an issue for them, and they both stepped up last year. I think that they're going to be able to make some plays defensively. I think they fixed some issues, and they're going to definitely show some more improvements this upcoming season.
I was going to say, not traditionally a strong defensive team.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. But last year they did show those improvements. They did fall back a little bit against Kansas City, but a lot of teams do in that case. So I think that they're going to shock a lot of people this year defensively. Number 2, I like the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, having a guy like Joey Bosa on that team, Casey Hayward, Derwin James, they have Melvin Ingram, lots of good pieces on that defense. When they're healthy, they are elite and one of the best, if not the best in the NFL. But health is an issue for them. So if they can all stay healthy, look out for this team to help the Chargers find success. And number 1, I'm in agreement with you. The Chicago Bears, Khalil Mack took huge steps, especially early on in the season last year. Roquan Smith was a nice rookie for them last year as well. You mentioned they got Clinton-Dix this off-season. They're a good team. They're a young team, and they could continue to make steps forward. That defense kind of carried them a little bit later on in the year. I'm not sure if they're going to have to rely on the defense too much this year, but if they do, they're going to be okay because that defense is elite.
Yeah, and I think we had a lot of similar teams on our list, so clearly kind of thinking along the same lines here. It's tough to make these picks so early in the year, but it's almost like picking March Madness. You know there's going to be at least 1 or 2 surprises that you're going to have to try to factor in if you actually want to be correct.
Yeah, it's very true. And we're looking at this point of the season right now where training camp's a month away. There aren't really too many huge injuries really at this point that happen during mini camps or at least during the off season. So a lot of our predictions that we make right now could obviously change over the next month or so depending on what happens in training camps. Obviously, when we continue to do more of these fantasy breakdowns, at least before the season, I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of changes that could possibly happen regarding any one of the rankings that we've done so far.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Probably even in preseason, there's going to be some shakeups that happen because of some sort of injury, some sort of suspension, some sort of news that comes out. You never know what's going to happen. So we might have to revise these as we go. But for now, here's what we have for you.
Yes, and this is why when you do fantasy football, push off your draft as far as you can because you do it too early, and some of these guys that you draft might not even be able to play this year. So this is what we're doing these right now. We're giving you a brief idea, but keep an eye on your drafts. Make sure you do them later on before the season, not too early because you don't want to risk missing out on possibly a steal.
Yeah, and that brings us to, I believe, the end of our show, correct, Ian?
Yeah, that does bring us to the end of Touchdown Tuesdays for this week. What final thoughts do you have for the viewers?
Continue to support us and watch and listen on iTunes, Google Play, and Spreaker, or catch us live on YouTube when we do our recordings. Ian usually posts now when we are recording live if you would like to get in on that action.
Yep, that's very well said, Ryan. Again, thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays. Again, as always, we are the official football podcast of Brew Sports. Check us out each week. iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker, and also live. Check us out on YouTube. Feel free to do so. Make sure to keep us updated or keep checking us out on our social media pages, Facebook and Twitter. Again, we'll get our question of the week out over the next day or two. Also want to give a shout out to our basketball podcast, Run It Back. Our buddy Eric's continued to run that show over the last few weeks, and he is expected to get his new episode coming out after the NBA draft this upcoming week. So definitely do keep an eye out for that over the next week or so. We're still in the works. We're getting some stuff done this summer, and we look to kind of rebrand the whole Brew Sports this upcoming summer for everyone. But again, thank you for listening for Touchdown Tuesdays this week. We'll be back with you next week regarding the news and everything there is in the world of football. Good night.